on this computer. Okay. So just a warning, this lecture is being recorded. I've been asked to sort of point you towards this announcement. So this week they're going to be running, or the engineering department is going to be running a collection of sort of presentations for those specializing in any of the following specializations. So I think this week is week 9. So if you're specializing in chemical engineering, there's going to be a little sort of info seminar from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. on May 4th. What day is it today?
It's week 10.
Oh, it's week 10. Okay, so you've missed the chemical one if you're a chemical, but mechanical, mechatronics, software, civil, and electrical will all be up this week. So here are the individual pieces of information for that. So this one, I guess, is not relevant. So the Mech Eng one is going to be May 10th. Mechatronic engineering is going to be May 12th. Software engineering is going to be May 17th. Civil engineering is going to be May 18th. Electrical engineering is May 19th. And if you want any of the particulars of this, I put this announcement onto the EdStem somewhere. So you can go ahead and sign up for those events if you choose to. Okay, so but back to what we need to talk about today. So let's just recall what we did last week. So last week we started talking about graphical user interfaces, and we learned that we could utilize this tkinter object to put widgets inside of. So we can think of sort of like a tkinter object as some type of window, and into this window we can pack things. And so far we've learned about exactly one type of thing that we could pack, and that was like a label, right? We didn't learn any other widgets last week, did we? I think it was just labels, right? So we learned how to pack labels. We learned that labels had sort of dimension, and they had sort of styling attributes like background color and foreground color. We learned that also that any widget has to be packed into the window. And we can pack from the top, the bottom, the left, or the right, where the top is the default packing. We also learned that we could take these widgets and expand them, which means that the widget is allowed to have as much yard as it would like. It's like the smallest, you can put a house and then you can like maximize the land around your house. That's what expanding would do. We can also fill, which means that the house isn't the smallest house you can build on your land, it's the biggest house that you can build on your land. I don't know if that's the best analogy, but it's sort of like expanding means that you get as much space around you as you want. And filling means that you get to occupy all the space that you've been allocated. So this fill and expand is going to become a little bit more important with today's examples. Okay, so what we're going to do today is introduce this notion of a frame, which is kind of weird because usually windows go in frames, but in this case we're going to have frames that go inside windows. What a frame is going to allow us to do is just create groupings of widgets. So we can move frames around, and the stuff inside will move around as well. So here's an example of two labels that have been packed into a frame, and that frame's been packed into a root. So let's just go ahead and start coding this stuff up. So live coding is pretty difficult to begin with. It's especially difficult when doing GUI programming because I have to remember like 100 different keywords. So today, if you can give me a hand, if I forgot an option or a keyword, things will go a lot more smoothly. But I'm going to do my best. So we'll just spin up a new, I'll call it bar. And let's just start coding this bar. So what are the pieces? Okay, so we need to import the tkinter library. So from import tkinter as tk. And remember that we're allowed to use these short names. We always need a root window. Last week we're calling that a window. This week we're going to call it a root. And this is just a tk object. We can give this root some geometry. I think maybe 200 by 200. And then we have to root.main loop. So this is always the first thing that we do, is write a root window and write a main loop. And I'm never going to do too much at once. So let's just check what this does. Cool. Oh, that's going to be annoying. So I'm just going to unfull screen this. So the window will launch here. Okay. Okay, so let's create, now I'm going to create something called a frame. And this is just a tk.frame. Frame. And then I can just go ahead and just pack the frame. And let's just say the side is tk.top, which is the default. And let's create two labels. So let's have one label, tk label. Let's give it some text. Let's call this Alice. Let's give it some background. Let's call this purple. Background equals purple. Let's make another label. Let's make this Bob. Let's make this yellow. But there's one thing I haven't done yet. Well, two things. First of all, these labels have to be packed. And let's just say their side is tk.left, maybe. Pack this one. But each of these frames and these labels have to be given the window that they're drawing in. So the frame, I'm just going to say you get packed in root. And then these labels, I'm going to pack them into the frame instead of the root. Okay, let's see what this does. Whoops. Line 7. That should be here. Okay, so here's what we did. So there's our 200 by 200 window, root. Alice and Bob. Notice how we packed them to the left. If I didn't put them in this frame, we would expect Alice and Bob to be over here. Look what happens if I tell this frame to pack from the bottom. Now both of these things have moved to the bottom. If you look at what's happening here, so I drew this sort of green sort of frame or border around Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob live inside a frame. And this frame at the moment is exactly as big as Alice and Bob require to fit in the frame. And thereby, when we're packing from the left or from the right, it's doing so in this frame itself. Right? So if I can move, so the packing is always relative to your root frame. Right? So this is the thing that can get kind of complicated, but it's going to enable us to do some stuff that we weren't able to do last week. Like create like a number pad on a phone. So I think that's this, okay? So I don't think last week we actually had the tools required to draw something like this. How could we draw something like this now, right? Whenever you start spinning up these GUIs, the first thing that we want to do is get like your framework together. That is, in like what kind of frames do we need where? So any ideas of how we could draw something like this? Right? Now that I've given you one extra tool, and that is that of a frame. Yes? But then how do we get the labels to like stack on top of each other as triplets? Like we don't have like really like a new line or something like that, right? Yes, sir. Okay, so we can have a frame for each row. So that would be sort of one frame here, another frame here, another frame there, and another frame at the bottom. So that's 4. But notice how like everything's sort of centered in this window. So what else do we need? Yes, sir.
Another frame for all 4 frames.
Another frame for the frame itself. So like a frame of frames. So we have a root window with a frame that's going to collect all of the rows, and then one frame for each row. So 5 frames in total. I think like this. So we have one frame here, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 for the other one. So how are you going to be packing the frames and the buttons within the frames? So let's focus on this row. How do we pack in that row frame? Well, do we go top to bottom in that row frame? Left to right, right? So we want to pack from the left in that frame, and we want to pack 3 buttons, 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so we're going to pack into each of these row frames from the left. How do the frames themselves stack in the green frame, the frame, or the number frame? Top to bottom, right? So like we have this row frame, then this row frame, then this row frame, and then this row frame. So you see how this is going to work? We're going to create 4 row frames and pack left to right. And then we're going to take those row frames and pack top to bottom in a bigger frame to get something like this. And I'm going to code it like 4 or 5 times because we're going to do it sort of very quick and dirty, and then we're going to try to simplify it a bit. Okay, so I'm going to delete some stuff here. Okay, so let's just do exactly what I need to do. So we need a root window. That's fine. I'm just going to call this a frame. So this is the frame that's going to hold all of the, I don't want to call it row frame. I'll just call it number pad frame, or frame for the number pad. Okay, and this is going to be a frame, and it's going to have, it's going to be a frame of root, tk.frame. Okay, so that hasn't done anything yet. We always have to make sure after this to pack the frame, or it won't appear. Now, just be careful. If you look up code online for tkinter, a lot of programmers will just simply do something like this, which is totally fine, but then this doesn't actually refer to the frame, right? Once you've packed it, like this sort of gets given nothing. So just be careful that if you execute the packing on the frame, you don't actually have a reference to the frame. So that's why I always do it in two pieces like this. I create a frame, give it a name, and then immediately after I sort of pack. Okay, now we're going to need our 4 row frames. So frame for row 1 is going to be a tk.frame. We're going to pack that into the frame number pad. And then we need this frame for row 1. We need this to pack, what did I say? So the rows themselves have to pack from the top. Top. tk.top. And then that frame is fine. tk frame. Okay, so let's just do 1. But now I want to sort of create buttons, right? So how does or not really a button, but a label. So I want to create a label. So let's just call it a label. This is going to be a tk.label. tk.label. I've lost my autocomplete, which is terrible. Oh, that should be like this. That should be like this. Okay, what do I want to put in this label? I think I just want to put like a number like 1. Let's just give this like a random background color. Let's call it red. Whoops. We'll give this a background color red. Let's say we'll just give this some width, and we'll give it some padding because it just makes it look a little bit nicer when we have padding, although that may be a lot of padding. Okay, so let's just take this label then, and let's pack it. And let's pack it in the frame for row 1. And let's let its side be tk dot, I think we have to go from the left. So from the left, and let's see if this works. Oops. Yeah, so be prepared for a lot of stuff like this today. Line 28. Pardon me? This one? I think BG's fine. I am packed. That shouldn't go here. That should be here. I always confuse these. That should be there. Yes. Okay. So we have, there's our 200 by 200 window. There's that like single button 1 that we created. It's living in its frame and in the middle. Now, how many of these buttons am I going to have to create? Like 9 of them? I don't really want to have to do this every time. Like this seems super messy. So don't forget that like when we're writing GUIs, we're writing so like in the Python ecosystem. So let's write programs that will help us do these things. So let's write a function, make a label. And I'm just going to say, give me x, an integer, and I'm going to return a tk.label. tk.label. Okay. So what is this going to do? This is going to return a tk.label, and I want the same label. So I'm just going to basically take all of this, just dump it here. I don't need to give it a name. I just want to return it. Then I actually don't need this. Let's just put this out a bit. Okay, so this is going to be a function that given x is going to return a button with a label where it's labeled by that integer. So let's just see that it works. Here, I need to say label is a make label for 1. And that should still do the trick. Cool. So I want to do another one now. So let's do this. Label is a make label for the number 2. Let's pack that to the side, tk.left, and now we should see 2 labels in there. Perfect, 1, 2. Okay, but it occurs to me that we probably should have told this label where it's living. There should be another attribute here. So let's just say this is where you should be going, your master frame. So this is going to be a tk object. So let's just make sure that it's going to go to master. So here I can say go to frame row 1, because eventually we're going to have to change that. And that can be in frame row 1 as well. And put a 2. Whoops. Extra bracket. Cool. 1 and 2. Okay, so what I want to do, so if we look back here, actually, these are all colored differently. So what I'm going to do is just something a little bit, I don't know, a little bit cheeky or a little bit fun. I'm just going to have these labels just make themselves have random backgrounds, just so they'll look different. So I'm going to import the random library from random import random integers. And then I wrote this neat little function last night. I just have to grab it. Was it in here? Nope. Was it in here? Nope. A lot of stuff to go over today. Where are you? Aha. This. Okay, so this function, you don't have to understand what it does, but I'll let you know what it does. So this is just going to generate a random color, by which I mean that it just has to generate a random hexadecimal number, because we learned last week that hexadecimal numbers represent RGB triplets. So I'm just saying here, give me a random number between 0 and 255, give it to me 3 times, and then convert it to a hexadecimal number. That's what these statements do. Don't worry too much about understanding what it does, but I'm just going to go into here, and instead of saying all of my labels are going to be red, I'm going to say all of my labels should be random colors, and let's see what that does. Boom. Okay, that's now giving us random colors, makes it look a little bit nice, at least now that we can see that these numbers are going to be separated. Now, this is sort of already getting messy, and I only have 2 buttons. So let's be a little bit more clever about how we're going to load these buttons into these frames. Namely, I want to use loops. So there's our label, there's our root, there's our frame for the number pad, there's our number for packing. So, okay, so let's do create number labels and pack them into rows. Okay, so let's get rid of this. Okay, so we're going to have how many rows? 4 rows. There's going to be, we have to loop 4 times. And then in each loop, we want to get the numbers sort of 1, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, or 7, 8, 9. How can we be clever about this? Or maybe there's a better way for doing this. So for k in range 10, okay? So for each k, we need to create 1 label. So what should we do here so we can get this all done in 1 loop? I want to be clever programmers. Okay, so each 3 times, so we go 0, 1, and 2, and that has to pack into a frame. And then 3, 4, and 5 have to pack into a frame, but a new frame. And then 6, 7, 8 have to pack into a frame, but a new frame. So I think I want to do something like this to say if k modulo 3 is equal to 0, which in Python we say this. Right? If it's not the case that k mod 3. When k mod 3 is 0, this will be true. I then want to say create a row frame. So here we go. Create a row frame. So a frame is going to be a tk dot frame. We're going to pack that into the frame number pad, and then we're going to pack it, and I'm just going to say side equals tk dot top for the time being, even though that's the default parameter. Okay, so that creates a new frame. And then what we want to do, we want to say in this frame, put a label. So I need a label. That's going to be my make label. Make me a label with this number and put it in this frame. So that's, maybe I should call this the row frame, just to be a little bit more clear. Row frame. And then I want a label dot pack. And as we said, we want to pack this from the left. Okay, so what's going to happen here? So we're going to go in, we're going to create a new frame for the row, and then we're going to pack into that row. And then we're going to repeat that 2 more times, and then we should repeat that 3 times. So let's see if this works. Sorry, oh, here, thank you. Do I have any other lefts, or maybe I just didn't save? Aha! See, so that's like a lot more clean, right? So I managed to pack all of those buttons in here without like just sort of manually creating 9 buttons. That would have got quite messy. Like, what's the benefit of like having this method here, this make label? Like, suppose I wanted to change the styling of one of the labels, or all of the labels. I only have to do it in one place, instead of like doing a search and destroy on like all the 9 buttons I've created. So do definitely use functions and stuff like that in concert with your TK interprogramming. Yes?
I think the outer frame should be centered.
Yes, we'll do that now. So how can we get because right now the outer frame is being stacked to the top. How can I get it to like be in the center of the window? No, so centering is like an anchoring property. So we expand. Yeah, whoever said expand was right. So we just need to go in here and tell it the frame for the number pad should be allowed to have as much space as it would like. tk.true. And then that should sort that. Ta-da. And as you see, if I like do this, it's still in the center. Okay? I'm doing this because at the end of class we're going to try and write a calculator application. And so that's going to be the bare minimum that we need is like a number pad. But appreciate that without these frames, there was really no way of getting these types of rows. Right? The frame is really the last ingredient you need to do placements. Right? Whenever you have a GUI and you want to decide how to lay it out, right, you should always be thinking about how you can sort of organize things into frames and frames within other frames and so on and so forth. Okay? So again, we want to do clever stuff like using loops instead of sort of copy-pasting 9 times. That's how it's going to get error-prone. All right, moving on. Okay, so we're going to move to events now, which is this is sort of like a higher, sort of like more of an advanced topic of an event. Are you guys familiar at all of how your operating system actually works? Probably not. So it seems like your computer is doing a bunch of stuff simultaneously, right? Like you can be listening to music and typing out an email and like moving your mouse around. And that all seems to be happening concurrently. The fact of the matter is it's not happening concurrently. Do you know how you can watch like a movie and the movie's not actually fluid motion? It's a bunch of like discrete pictures taken that are like flashed back at us so fast that it appears to be fluid. Yeah? The same sort of thing is happening on your computer. Your computer is engaging in something called multitasking, which means that at any given point, it's only ever doing one thing. So I thought that was a Habs logo on your hat. Don't worry about it. I thought you were wearing a hat from the competing hockey team for the Leafs, and it was distracting me. I thought you were a troll. In any case, so there's something on your computer called the scheduler, right? So everything on your computer sort of has to say, I need you to do some processing for me. And the computer says, okay, get in line. Get in this thing called the scheduler. And the computer sort of goes into the list of things that it has to do and does a little bit of the thing at the first thing of the queue for like 10 milliseconds. And then something else for like 10 milliseconds. And then something else for 10 milliseconds. But it's only ever doing one thing at a time. So this is a process called multitasking. And it appears as if all of your programs are running fluidly when you look at it. But in actuality, your computer is doing exactly one thing at a time. So you'll learn about schedulers and stuff like that in the operating systems course. I'm telling you about this because an event is something that goes to the scheduler as well. Like, this is a little bit different. Up to now, when we've invoked functions, there's a literal line in our code that says, x is equal to f at 7. That's an invocation by us in code. We're going to have to write functions now which get invoked based on some event happening on the computer. So like, imagine you can have your function foo trigger if the phone rings. That's like a little bit, it's different than what we've been doing. First of all, the phone ringing is, do you know what I mean when I say this is a non-deterministic action? Like, you can't predict ahead of time when your phone's going to ring, right? When we're programming, remember we're talking about like what are the constituent pieces of like having software, and it's sequence, selection, and iteration. Sequence meant that like if we just followed the code top to bottom and faithfully executed it, we're going to get the same output that the computer gets. But this really throws a wrench into things when one of the instructions is, wait for someone to walk in the door or something like that. So we're going to learn how to handle events. The types of events that we're going to have to handle are, pressing a button. We want a function to be able to invoke itself if a human presses a button on the screen. So we're going to have to sort of engage with talking with the operating system to say, hey, can you just let us know when a button's been pressed so we can tell our function foo to go ahead and execute itself, right? So this is event-driven programming is like another sort of shift in thinking that we're going to have to handle. It's not going to be that bad because a number of events that we're going to be sort of studying is constrained. There's like many more events. Like any type of network programming is going to have the same type of problem. If you have to ask, go access this information from a different computer, right? You're going to have to wait for that computer to give you a response. So this event-driven programming is extremely interesting, but it really does up the sophistication of our programs. Especially when you can imagine a scenario where you wrote a program where like Alice is waiting for some response from Bob, and Bob is waiting for some response from Alice at the same time. This is called the deadlock, right? So this is sort of like a new type of infinite loop that we've introduced by having these event handlers. But it's quite interesting. So the events that we're going to be interested in are button presses, text entry, key presses, or mouse clicks, right? And as we know, interacting with the user always makes things a little bit complicated. So let's start with buttons. So there's an example of a button. So a button is just another widget that can be clicked. So that's all we're going to do today. So I'm just going to keep introducing more widgets. And all of these TK widgets have very similar interfaces. We've always been talking about this interface implementation difference. So by the end of this, I should be able to say, TK Inter also has this widget. And you should know mostly how to style it and pack it, because like all of the options are going to be the same, right? The frames can have backgrounds, and we frame the backgrounds the same way we frame label backgrounds. So this is a good way of engaging with good design, right? Because this is a professional level package. So okay, let's create buttons. So let's create this button in particular. So here are the instructions that are going to create this button. So I'll just I'll just live code it, because I have all of these emergency buttons. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of most of this stuff. Let's say root is a tk object, and I want a button, and that's going to be a tk.button. We always have to tell it where to go, so I want that to be in root. I want the text to be press me, and then I want to pack the button into, I don't know, we'll just give it the default one for now, tk.top. Let's see what we get. Never do too much at once because of stuff like this. Line 13, what have I done? Oh, There we go. Okay, that's pretty small, but we do have a button. Let's just try to make this a little bit bigger. So let's say root.geometry. Let's make this 200 by 200. And this is going to be a good way to illustrate the difference between fill and expand. So how can I get this press me button to be in the middle of this window now? Pardon me? It is anchored. It has center anchoring. Yeah, we have to tell this button that it's allowed to have as much space around it that it wants. And the way to tell it to have as much space around it that it wants is exactly as my colleague over there said, to expand it. So this is tk.true. Okay, let's play more though. What happens if in addition to doing this, I tell it to fill? What do we think is going to happen? Oh, this is going to be operating system dependent. This is a bad example. Okay, so the whole thing now becomes a huge button, right? But this may not work if you're on Linux or Windows. This is something that's operating system dependent. But for my operating systems, it's okay. Do you see how I told this button it's allowed to have as much space as it wants, and I told the button that it's allowed to fill that space? Okay, so that whole thing's a button. What happens now if I take away this expand? What do you think is going to happen? Okay, it expands in all of the space that it was allocated without having been allowed to expand. So I'll take this off again because this is worth studying. Right, so the button up there gets to have all of the horizontal space, right? It's been packed to the top, so that means that all of this is sort of been allocated to the button. So when I told it to fill here, it gets to use the space to the left and the space to the right. When I expanded it, it got even more space, in which case it was allowed to occupy the whole thing. So I'm just going to go back to doing this to have a button in the middle. Okay. So there's our button. It doesn't do anything. It's not a very useful button. So now what I want to be able to do is sort of tell this button to do something. And the way that we do that is by adding an additional optional argument to button. And that optional argument is going to be called command. All right, so this is going to be the thing that's going to trigger when we hit the button. So I'm going to put foo here, and I'm going to spin up a function called foo. It's just going to return nothing. Let's just have it say print ouch. Okay. And see what this does. Okay, so now I press this, and it's outputting ouch. Right? It's sort of utilizing the fact that it can react to this event of the button being pressed. So there's something I want to point out here. So notice, here's my foo. What is sort of different about how I've put in foo there? We don't have the brackets there. What would this mean? If I put brackets there, that's function invocation, correct? So that is me saying execute foo, invoke foo, print something. But that's not what command is expecting. Command is expecting to be given a function itself, not the return of a function. So there's a huge difference between putting those brackets there and leaving them out. So in this case, we have to leave it out because button's saying, I'm an optional parameter called command, and the thing that I expect to be given is a function. And I'm going to call that, I will invoke the function when I'm pressed. But it has to be there without brackets. Now we'll learn at the end of this course that we can write functions. So this would be a great place for an anonymous function, which are functions that I could write a function in here without having to name it. It's called the lambda expression. We'll leave that for the end of term. But just keep that in mind, right? That this is a very typical mistake. Let's just see what kind of error it throws, actually, just so we can know. Oh, that sucks. Okay? So it's a silent error. So just be very careful. If you're not getting the expected behavior of your GUIs, right, This is a very sticky bug to try and track down because it's not going to tell you anything's wrong. Because I suppose, what did this return? Nothing. And then I'm saying the command is nothing. So that was totally fine syntactically for Python. So just be very careful about that. Okay, so this is really the first instance of us engaging with event-driven programming, right? Where I've had a button which can do something when it's pressed, right? This function is invoking itself every time this button is pressed, which is a cool thing. That's not something we've been able to do yet. Event handling. Oh, we just did that. Text entry. Okay, so again, we're just going to go through a bunch of different options for getting input from the user via these widgets. So we can read single lines of text using the TK entry widget and retrieve the contents of that widget with the get method. So here's an exercise, and I've deliberately not given any instruction on how to use the TK entry widget because it should have very similar interface to all the other widgets that we've been using. Like, for example, can anyone guess how we can make the background to your blue? Yeah, BG, right? We're not going to have a different background optional parameter for label than from frames than from this, right? We should be able to guess most of the parameters that we need here. Okay, so what is the most basic type of framework now that we can do to have this? Because there's two things here, right? I need a text entry window, I need a button, and those both need to live in this window. So how could we get this type of arrangement? And let's try to make it like as simple as possible. Yes, sir.
You make a button which, when you press it, calls a function which has an input in it, and then you just...
That is a correct answer for a question I haven't asked yet, but I'll give you credit for it anyway. So my colleague up there says, in order to implement this, we're going to want to create a button whose command is to use get to get stuff from that window. But my question was, how do we lay it out in the first place? Right, so how should these widgets be packed? Yes?
An expanded frame, and then you pack to the left and to the right, depending on...
Okay, so let's have like a frame to put both of those things in, and then into that frame, I guess we can just pack from the left. I don't actually think we even need the frame, right? Because, well, we're just going to put it in the root window. Right, it's very simple. I just have the window. I'm going to put something to the left and something to the right. Not to say it's probably more appropriate to use a frame, but I'm just trying to keep things as easy as possible. Okay, so what stuff do I need here? I want to keep my button, so I'll just keep the button. But before I pack a button, I want to pack a text window. And see, this is the problem. I have to remember these things. tk.entry. I'm just going to move this around. Okay. So I want an entry widget, so that's going to be tk.entry. Without even telling you like how this works, I know that I have to pack this into some root. I want some background color like light blue. And then entry needs to be packed in its window, and let's just say pack to the left. And then maybe this one I will pack from the right. How come this is complaining? Oh, there's a minus there. Okay, that's better. Line 6. Oh, geez, I always forgot to write this. Side. Oh. Okay, so I probably need to change the dimensions of this. So let's make this wider and shorter. Okay, so there's our text entry. There's our button. But let's just tell the button and the entry widget that it's can have as much space as it wants. And that should make everything look a little bit better. Okay, that seems fine. But you do see it takes a little bit of finagling in order to get this looking like the way that you do. So currently, this is still just outputting ouch. So instead of ouch, what I want to do instead is print what's inside the entry widget. So I'm going to have to be kind of naughty now because what I need to do is access this entry widget. But I've said like global variables are like a good indication that you're being lazy and should use an object instead. Now it is the case that we should be using objects for this, but just to keep the level of sophistication, so we can like focus on one thing at a time, I'm just going to do it like this. I'll use a global. At the end of class, we'll like make a calculator app and like really utilize these things into objects. So just keep in mind that I'm doing this, but being a tad, yeah, I'm not really supposed to be using these globals. But in any case, it'll give me access to this entry widget. And now in this entry widget, I can just utilize its get method, which I think it was a method. Yes. And now my button should be echoing what is in here. So if I put something in here and hit this, perfect. I should be able to get this out. Go Leafs, go. There we go. Drake is overrated. Boom. Okay, so there's another thing of now we're actually able to like utilize the state of the GUI itself, right? I'm saying go over there to that widget and tell me what's inside of it, and then give it to this button and let it print out. All right, so I hope you can sort of see how these things are going to start working together. What is next? And again, like we didn't actually have to look at the documentation because we were just aware that all of these widgets basically have all of the same interfaces. Like there'll be some sort of nuances where you do have to look in the docs, but generally speaking, like most of the optional parameters are the same. Mouse clicks and movement. One of the most important events is that of a mouse click. Right? Without the mouse, you really wouldn't be talking about GUIs in the first place. I say used to be because maybe the mouse is kind of going out of fashion now that we have all of these like touch interfaces. But if we encapsulate our code properly, it shouldn't make that much of a difference to sort of distinguish between a mouse click and a finger click. We're not going to track mouse movement of the entire screen, right? We're going to track mouse movement within the window that we create. And we're going to do so using something called a canvas. So I'm just going to spin this up and then we can take a look. So I'm going to get rid of everything again. Get rid of this. Let's revert this back to something square. I don't need that entry. I don't need that button. All right. Also notice that my starting point when using tkinter is to get a root and to use the main loop. Right? I always run the main loop because if you don't execute this, nothing's going to happen. It's sort of the same way that I handle working with files. Whenever I open a file, I automatically close it and write everything in between. You should be in this habit of writing your root and your main loop at the same time. So now let's get a canvas. So a canvas is a tkinter object called canvas. We need to put that into root. Oh, canvas. And I'm not sure we actually need to give it anything else. Let's just tell this maybe we'll just give it a background color so we can see that it actually rendered. I'll call it purple. And we can pack our canvas and we'll just allow it to expand. tk.expand. It's true. And we'll also allow it to fill. tk.both. Okay, so when I run this, I'm expecting to see that, just a purple window. So this doesn't look any different to what we've been doing so far. But now I'm going to show you the one extra ingredient that is actually going to allow us to read mouse movement from this. Here we go. Okay, so there's something called binding. So when we bind, we're basically telling a widget to sort of like, it's almost like I'm telling this widget, hey, when the phone rings, I want you to do the following thing. And we would do so with a bind. But in this case, like the phone ringing is moving of the mouse, right? So using this bind, we can always instruct widgets to wait for some type of event trigger, right? And in this case, the event trigger is going to be some mouse action. So we bind Python functions and methods to an event triggered by a widget using this bind. And we always have to give it the event that we're binding to and the function that triggers when that event triggers, right? So these are always the two pieces. The handler function is a lot like, sort of like one of the methods in an object, in that event has to be its only argument, right? So we need to write a handler which takes an event, and that's it, right? It has to have a very particular form. And there's also this, so we're going to learn how to bind to individual widgets, but we can also use this bind all to bind to like the entire application, right? So bind all is, like, you know, in a video game, it doesn't really, when you're using the controller should be affecting the whole GUI, not just like aspects of the GUI. So that's when the bind all would be appropriate. But let's focus on the bind first. Okay, so I'm saying we can bind something to an event. I have to tell you sort of what goes in here now. So here are some of the events that the mouse can trigger in tkinter. The angled brackets here have to be included, right? I'm saying angle bracket button is the event, right? When we're going to put that in as a string for the option. So we have button is a button press, button dash n, right? Your mouse has plenty of buttons. They're all numbered, so we can wait for a particular one to be clicked. Motion in the canvas, that's the one sort of I want to utilize now. BN motion while button N is pressed. Button release, that one's sort of obvious. Button N release and key for key is pressed. So what I want to do is go back to here, and now I have to say something like, okay, so I have my canvas, it's been created, it's been packed, but now I want to say canvas, I want you to bind, and I want you to bind to this event, and I want it to be the mouse movement, so I have to look motion. Okay, so that's literally, or you have to put in strings that, like including the angle bracket, so be careful. And then I have to give it some type of function, foo, it's event handler. And as I said, foo is a function which takes an event and returns nothing. Right? It's just going to perform some type of action. So what action do I want it to perform? Well, in this case, I want to ask what the event.x coordinate is and ask what the event.y coordinate is. So an event is an object with this x and y attribute. So what this is going to do is just print the cursor movement, or print the position of the cursor when motion is detected. So let's see if this is going to work. Okay, so if I move my cursor into this canvas, we should start seeing coordinates appear in my bash. Aha. See that? So it's not detecting like where the mouse is, right? It's sort of detecting movement, right? That's when the event gets triggered. Keep in mind, so if I go up to here, what do you notice about the coordinate system? Well, the top left corner is 0, 0. The northwest corner is 0, 0. Aren't we used to our coordinate systems? In the coordinate system we use in math, the middle is sort of 0, 0, right? Increases in y get you up. Increases in y here push you down. So just keep that in mind, right? On these canvases, in our GUIs, the coordinate system is the northwest position is 0, 0. Increases in y get you down, push you down. And increases in x still get you from left to right. So keep that in mind. I think you can actually trigger a -1 if you go off the canvas somehow. I managed to do that last year. But you can see now that like Python is aware of the mouse's placement. Right, so you should start thinking, well, okay, of course, if I can get the mouse placement, then I can write event handlers that do like really sophisticated things. Right, so this is how we create games and applications. Wrong direction. Here are some of events objects' other attributes. So you can get the x coordinate of the mouse cursor, the y coordinate of the mouse cursor. The other type of event that we could be waiting for is a key press, and in those cases, you can get the string representation of the key press, the key sim representation, or the key code. So why are there 3 different things here? Well, okay, so consider that when you press a key on your keyboard, that we all have different keyboards, right? So it's not really straightforward to like cross-communicate between Python programmers Python programs, like what it means when a key is pressed. So we have three options here. Event.char. So each of you, regardless of your keyboard, should have a symbol like written on that key. So that's what the event.char is going to return, right? For that computer, for that keyboard, give me the symbol that's like on that key. KeySym is a standardization of the keys for tkinter. So tkinter may be like, I don't know, A is 98, B is 99, just so there could be a consistent manner which tkinter handles key presses, right? So you probably, when using tkinter, want to use KeySym, right? Have some type of converter, right? So your Python program is always going to work properly using the internal sort of labels. And then there's this key code. So each operating system is going to have a similar type of encoding for keys, but that's also going to be operating system dependent. So for tkinter, the best way to work with key presses is to use this KeySym, right? Because this is going to be standard among all tkinter users. Write a GUI that prints the coordinates of a mouse cursor when the cursor moves within the canvas. We already did that, so that wasn't too bad. Config. The config method is an alternate way of updating the style of a widget. Updating is different than setting because updating happens during the runtime of the application. Okay, so at the moment, if I wanted to have, like, change the background color of my canvas while that canvas is like in its window, we had no way of doing that. The only way we had to style widgets is at their instantiation. Using this config method, I can sort of like re-instantiate objects or widgets so that I can do things like change their styling while the program is running in itself. So these event handlers so one thing that an event handler often does is change how the GUI itself looks like. And we do so in the following way. So if I had a label, and I instantiate it like this, I say it's a label, it's packed into the root, and it has text old label. I can go ahead now and say label.config, so there's a config method, and then I just give this config method any of the same optional parameters that label could have took, right? This is like sort of taking an object that's been instantiated and like re-instantiating it with updated optional parameters. Okay, so let's create an interface whose background color toggles between purple and yellow, right? Just so we can have a button who is reacting to an event, and that reaction is going to actually change the GUI in itself. So let's give that a go. Probably over deleting everything. Well, we'll keep our foo. Okay, what do I need? I want to get rid of this canvas. We have this root. Okay, so I think we just need a frame here. So let's get a frame, tk.frame. Let's pack that into the root. Let's give this a background color equal to yellow. Let's take this frame, let's pack it, and let's say that it gets to expand. True. And let's also let it fill to both. Both, B, tk.both, and that should be true. Okay, so I'm going to launch this, and I expect to see a window with a yellow, I expect to see a window with yellow everywhere. Okay, that's what we get. So notice I never do too much at once. You don't want to do too much at once because things can start getting off the rails. Okay, so now I need to put a button in the middle here. So was there a question? No, okay. So let's get a button. So this button is a tk.button. It's going to have we're going to have to pack that into the frame. And I'm going to give it some text. Let's just say toggle, or toggle. I like that better. Toggle. And let's just say button.pack. And I'll just pack it. I won't tell it to do anything else. And that should put it in the middle of the frame. No, it didn't. Oh, I have to expand it, of course. Expand, but not fill, because I don't want the button to be huge. So tk.true. Okay, so we have this toggle button. It's not doing anything. Okay, so how do I get this button to actually do something? It's not a bind in this case, it's a command. So foo is the thing that's going to trigger when the button is pressed. So what should foo do? Well, I need to be naughty again because I need access to this frame. And what do I want foo to do? Well, I want to take the frame and I want to configure it so that it gets a different background color. So maybe I say background equals purple. Did I start at yellow? Okay, so let's give that a try. So if I press this, it should go, yep, that's exactly what should happen. Ah, this doesn't need to take an event. Purple. Okay, but now I can't go back. So how can I create this so that it can go back?
Randomize the background color so the purple.
You want to randomize? That would work. I could do that. But let's try to solve the problem in how I asked it, because that's going to require a little bit more thought. Well, since I'm playing around with globals, right, I can always have some global like next color state, but there's another way of doing this. You are actually able to index into frame or index into any widget as it's a dictionary, and you can ask for what any of its optional parameters have been set to. So frame at BG here is going to be yellow. So I'm saying if this is yellow, right, then set this to purple. Else set it to yellow. Okay, so let's see if this will do the trick. Hooray! All right, so now we can have our a party. So epilepsy warning, but right. Apparently, I don't know, channeling Wario. I guess those are his colors. Okay. Write a GUI that shows the 3 encodings corresponding to a key press label. Okay, so let me throw it out to the audience. If I wanted to do this, what's the widget that I need? Or like what are the components that are required here? Okay, how do I get text to display in a GUI? Label, thank you. Okay, so in the middle of this, we need a label. That label is going to need to display 3 things based on a key press. So what do I need to determine if something's been key pressed? We need to bind, right? I need to have some type of, I need to have a label, and that label needs to be bound or binded to an event, and that event is a key press. So let's go through all the pieces for doing that. So the first thing I want to do, don't do too much. Again, let's just try to get, I'll just get rid of all of this stuff. I'll even get rid of this frame and that button. Let's just try to get some text into the middle of the window. So to get some text in the middle of the window, that should be a label. That's a tk.label. I want to pack that into root. I want this to have some text. And the text is, I don't know, hello. Okay, then I want to take this label. I want to pack it, but I want to let it expand so that it's in the middle. tk.true. So when I run this, I expect to see a window with the word hello in the middle. That's great. Okay. But now, I want to be able to click keys on my keyboard so that this label is going to change somehow. So I do that by binding. So I say this label, I need you to bind to some event. And in the case of that event, I want you to run the following function. And this function is going to be called foo, and it's going to be given this event, and it's going to do something. Okay, so the first thing I need to know is what goes here, what event. And I can't remember. So I have to go back and check. Key, we want key. All right, so I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to say, label, I want you to react to the event that a key is pressed. And the way that I want you to react is through foo. And what should foo do? Well, again, I'm going to be a little bit naughty. I'm going to say, give me access to the label. So I can take the label and I can configure it so that its text is something new. And what should the text be? I want it to be 3 things. I have to remember again what they were. Event.char, keysim, and keycode. So this should be event.char, event.keysim. What was the last one? Event.code, like this? Like that. Okay, let's give it a try. Okay, so there's my initial window. So I'm going to hit K. And it doesn't work. What haven't I done? Huh? I may have had to hit my emergency button. Well, let's try again. That should have worked. No. I don't want to use the emergency button yet. Does anyone see what I'm doing wrong? Oh, I don't want to use the emergency button. Let's use the emergency button. Key press. Oh, of course, I have to, in this case, I have to bind all. Aha. Yeah, for key presses, you should bind all. Like the whole window should be waiting for key presses. This is a little bit different than like mouse movements where I can actually be in something. So that was my mistake. So let's see if this will work. Okay, yes, that's better. Okay, so I see I've pressed K and it's saying, on this system, you press the button. What's written on that button is K. What the code is that thing on the right. And the internal representation of this in TK Inter is K. But like there's me holding shift, left shift, right shift, shift K, which notice it doesn't register 2 mouse buttons. It just registers like capital K. But you can get everything here, essentially. So that's also important, right? If you wanted to now use WASD to like move a little man around the screen, that's how you would do it, right? You would just bind, you would bind to the application itself, waiting for key presses. So there we have that. We've done that. We've done this. We've done that. Yes.
When you mentioned using WAS to like move around, is it possible to make it so that an event happens while the key is pressed? And like as soon as you let go.
Well, like we can't. So again, this is why I was talking about multitasking. It doesn't really make sense to talk about 2 things happening concurrently. Right, because like at one point the computer will be like, is the user typing anything? No. Okay, then I'm gonna go do something else. So I guess the answer is yes. Like other things could be happening when you press that K, but like the way that it's actually been programmed, it's like nothing ever really happens simultaneously. Does that make any sense?
Let me try to rephrase the question.
Sure.
Let's say if you like hold down the key, for that cause an event to continue happening. Does it just happen once?
Oh, if I'm holding it down?
Yeah.
Let me see what happens there.
I mean, in this example, nothing will happen.
Yeah, I don't. So I see what you're saying. If I want to hold down.
Is it possible to make it an event continue?
Yeah, because there's probably many more event. Like there's probably like a key release event and a key press event. Right? This is not a comprehensive listing of all of TK Inter. Okay, so that's the other thing I have to mention. You have to engage with the docs. I'm not going to be able really to show you everything. And being able to read documentation is like part of what we need to be able, for you guys to be able to do. Last year, in our A3, they had to engage with animations, and we taught nothing about animations. Like that was totally something that we expected the class to pick up on their. I say that now, telling you that we're going to ramp down the difficulty of A3, but yeah, if you ever don't use my slides as your master resource for TK Inter, you should use my slides as like an entry point into TK Inter. Like I'm showing you like a restricted tool set just so we can get used to it. But yeah, you really have to look at the documentation itself to get some of those acute sort of event stuff. Yeah. I'm happy just sort of creating my Connect 4, but yeah, maybe next year I'll try to do Flappy Bird or something. You guys remember Flappy Bird? I never know if my references are landing or not. Okay, so a GUI with with object-oriented principles. So as I was saying, you saw a bunch of times I was using global variables, which is like bad. So obviously the way that we want to do this is by encapsulating our code into objects. So the way that you usually do this is that the root window your object has to take as a input parameter the root window. Right? That has to be spun up outside of the object itself. So like if I make an app, the app says, I'm happy to draw anything for you, but you have to provide for me the window that I'm going to be drawing into. So just keep that in mind. So you're always going to have some type of statement like make a root, create the app, the app is going to use this root as its root window, and then root.main loop. So what we're going to try to do now is write a calculator application. But I need to rest my voice a bit, so maybe I'm going to give you guys a 10-minute break. But during this 10-minute break, think about like how we're going to lay this out and what the component parts are going to be. So it's 1:15, so 10 minutes, right? I will pause the recording. Go through some of my checklists. Can you hear me out there, Chatland? T. Kinter? Yeah. Yes. Okay, so what ideas are out there for how we should organize our widgets in this type of frame? How many frames do you think would be appropriate here? Should maybe a tough question. Like I look at this and I see, okay, I need to divide this into two pieces, the top and the bottom. So there's already 2 frames. The bottom frame has to be broken up into its left and right. So there's like another 2 frames in the interior of that frame. This we know is going to take 5 frames. This probably is 1 frame for like 1 column. Is everyone sort of savvy with that? It's like the first thing I want to do is kind of just like get the layout working before I do anything else. So it's unlikely we're going to be able to do all of this in the next 25 minutes. But we're going to do as much as we can in 25 minutes, and then you can go look at the calculator app that I throw up there. Yes, sir.
Why do you choose to stack like left to right and then one on each other and not columns?
I'm not saying columns would be wrong, or you could do columns if you wanted instead. In fact, because I want everyone to think back to this Connect 4 that we're going to do. So next week, after we talk about, I think next week is going to be about file menus and like raising dialog boxes, like, do you really want to quit? Something like that. And in that case, yeah, it's best to organize by column, because we're going to want to click on a column to like do a move. But why did I do it by row? I really don't have a good, because I didn't do it by column, I guess is my answer to that question. But both would be appropriate in this case. Yeah. Yeah, because I suppose you can see this as, yeah, the number pad here could easily have been 3 columns rather than four rows. But then the counting becomes more unnatural, I guess. Yeah. Anyway, I'm never saying the way that I'm doing it's the best way of doing it. It's simply a way of doing it. Okay, so let's try to get the individual layout going. So I created an object here called a calc app object. So this way I don't have to like mess around with global variables. I can use sort of like class instantiated variables. And I'm just utilizing this instruction to actually run the app. We've talked a little bit about this before. So let's just see, let's just start doing little by little. So I want to take the self dot. So this is the main window. I want to give it some geometry. Let's look back here. So this is not really a square. It's a little bit wider than it is higher. I don't know, 400 by 300. Let's see. 400 by 300. We can always adjust. And then this has to get packed, right? Self.pack, self.master.pack. We'll just let it live there. So we should just see, if I call this, we should just see, what have I done? Pardon me? I must have, oh, I do have to give it a side. tk.top, top. Something is screwed up here. Line 15, give it a root. This root goes into here. I'm perplexed. Anyone see my mistake? Do I have to use my emergency button already? This is why live coding is never advisable, but it's also kind of fun. Well, we'll try one more. Does anyone see my mistake? This is so simple. How could there be a mistake? Anyone? No, not this one. Did you had a suggestion, sir? This one's wrong? I still need to pack it. It's just the root. I don't have to. Maybe you're right. Oh, yes. Yeah, it needs to be a. Oh, thank you. Geez. Yeah, you don't pack the main window. You pack a frame in those windows. So maybe I should do that instead. So let's get a frame. Now we're off to the races again. Frame. Let's give this some background color just so we can debug. So that's going to be purple. Let's take this frame. Let's put it in the master window. And then let's take this frame and let's pack it to the top. So tk.top should be its side. And now I want to let it, I want it to fill the top. So I can let it expand. Just to the top. Let's see what that does. Maybe it's, maybe I wanted fill. Oh yeah, I can see it. It's just really short. I have to put something in it. So let's put in that frame. Let's put some text entry. Frame dot entry is a tk dot entry. Okay, I want to put that in that frame, the top frame. Maybe I should be more clever about how I call these things. That's the top frame. Do that there, and pack the entry frame. I think I want to pack it on the left. tk dot left should be its side. Let's see what I get here. tk dot frame. Okay, so that's not looking too bad. So there's our text entry, and there's like the top frame living there. I think maybe I need to make this a touch wider. So maybe 500, maybe that may be way too much. That's fine. Okay, so we have our text entry, we have this. So now we need to get like another frame underneath that frame. So we pack from the top. So if we get another frame, we want to pack that into the root, which I called, yeah, it's itself dot master in this case. And I want to take that frame and I want to pack it to the top. tk.top, top. And then I want to put stuff in this frame. Okay, so that goes in the self.master. Let's give it some background color just for debugging purposes. So that's yellow. And let's say that this is allowed to just utilize as much space as it wants. And fill. Fill both. Okay, so now I expect to see the window broken up into its top piece and bottom piece. Perfect. Okay, but now that yellow frame needs to be itself broken into two pieces. So in that frame, I want to pack the number frame. So, okay, I'll call this the bottom frame. Okay, and then into the bottom frame, I want the number pad frame. And I also want the, what else do I have to put in this calculator? The arithmetic frame, button frame. So these are both going to be frames. This is going to be packed in the bottom frame. Bottom frame. This one is also going to pack to the bottom frame. Bottom frame. Okay, I want this number pad frame to pack to the left. tk.left. I also want this to expand and fill. tk.true. Xfill equals tk.both. I have to give it some color for debugging. So let's say this is red. So that gets back to the bottom frame to the left. I have this one, which I also want to debug. So let's say background equals blue. And then I basically want to do the same thing for this, but for this. Okay, so let's see. So now I expect the bottom window to also be broken into two pieces. Okay. But you see like how we can't do that much at any given time. I didn't like try to attempt to write the whole calculator app and then start debugging it. I'm really just trying to get these pieces together. Yes, sir.
Why is the thing in the top of entry should be a label?
Oh yeah, it should be a label. Okay, I can, but here's the magic. I'll just change it to, where is it? Yeah, label. Yeah, why did I put an entry there? That should be a label. This should be a label.pack. And then I should just put, yeah, this is going to be the display. Display. Oops. Okay, that's better. Okay, so this label is going to get updated by events. These have to be our numbers, and these have to be our the buttons for the arithmetic. Okay, so I don't want to have to create all of these buttons are the same button, but with like a different label. Like their styling's exactly the same. I want to be able to like adjust them simultaneously. So the best thing to do here is just to create a method, perhaps. That's got to get at the right indent level. Let's create a method, a private method called generate button. Okay, and what this is going to do is return a button object. So what do we need to take? Well, it needs to take self, and we need to take, I want to call it a label, but that's a bad thing. What's a synonym for label? Sticker? That's not too bad. Okay, so we're going to create a button with that sticker as its label. So how do we get a button? So I want to return, okay, so I'm going to get a button. That's a tk.button. This button should be packed in what? All right, so I guess we need to also have, we have to tell it where to pack. So I'm just going to say, also give me a frame. So pack into this frame with this label. Oh, that should be root. The button's going to have some command, which we'll call foo. And note that I'm allowed to, you can define functions within functions. This is fine. But for now, we're just going to return nothing. I'll just print test. So that does that. Maybe I want to sort of say this has width equal to 2, and we'll just give it some padding. Padding always makes everything look a little nicer. Padding equals 5, and then I can return this button. Okay, so this should be able to create exactly one button. So let's try to get exactly one button into the number pad frame. Thank you so much. Let's try to get a button into the number pad frame. Okay, so I want to self.generate a button. And I wanted to do it in which frame? The number pad frame. And I wanted to have this label 1. And then I need to pack it. And I think I want it pack it to the left. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, so I have my button. It's 1, and it can like test down there. So I'm going to make this a little bit, sort of this function a little bit more clever. I'm going to say, for debugging purposes, I'm going to say button sticker pressed. So let's try to do this one. And let's add a couple more buttons. So there's our button for 1. There's our button for 2. There's our button for 3. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Boom. Okay, so we can press these buttons. They know what they are. So I'm not going to do the rest of them because I'm going to have to put them in frames and stuff. But three buttons should be enough. Okay, but the other thing that needs to be done, though, is when I press these buttons, this label up there should be changing, right? As if it's a calculator that I'm pressing into. So how can we get that? Well, let's create a global, or not really global, but class global, self dot maybe what's in the display. And the display can start off empty here. And then when we create this label, instead of displaying this, let's just have it display what's in self.display. And then each time that we press this button, I want to say self dot, do I have here? Gen button display. I want to add to the display what was pressed. So in that case, this is going to be sticker. And then I want to update the label. I need to update this label. So I better actually make this something that I can access everywhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and just do this, which enables me to go down here and to say, okay, so self.label, I want you to reconfigure that so that what its text is saying is like whatever now is in self.display. So let's see what happens there. Okay. So now I can do something like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So let's see how it's like stacking up there. Okay, so let's get 2 more buttons. Let's just get plus and equal, because maybe if we can get that done, then we'll call this a successful calculator. So what do I need to do now? I need to, into the arithmetic buttons, I want to generate, I have to be more careful about this. So I want a button. I want this to be a button that we're going to place in the arithmetic button frame. I want this frame to be labeled plus, and then I want to pack it. And I have to do it like this because I want to do some binding to plus, but that should work. Let's just say that, yeah, we should be packing from the top this time just to get them to stack top to bottom. So let's get a plus and let's try to get an equal. And let's see what that gets us. Okay. We could play with the expanding and filling, but still I get 1, 2, 3 plus equal. Okay. So this, I think this equal button has to be a little bit different because it's going to have a little bit of a different action. So instead of building it, this plus is fine, but this button down here, this equal button should do something a lot more clever. So let's not create it like this. Let's really create another button. So I'm just going to go down here and grab this. Oh no, I can be smart. I can still do this, but now I want to overwrite this button's command. So I'm going to overwrite the button's command with a new handler. This handler's foo. So what should happen when we hit the equal button? Yes. So I can't access that foo from here, which is good, right? Because we don't want the names to collide, right? So this foo is only available like basically exactly here, right? Which is good because I only want to like use it so I can give it to this button config. Well, when you hit equal on the calculator, what do you expect to happen? Like whatever's in our label should be evaluated, yeah? So there's this neat function in Haskell, Python, that you should never use. It's a super dangerous function, but generally you can evaluate given a string. Python will parse that and then evaluate it, but it's not limited to like arithmetic. This is literally will evaluate anything. So this is like a super unsafe function to, because like someone could pass evaluate, go to root and delete everything on this computer. It'll be like, okie dokie. So just be careful when using this. We're only going to use it in like what we really should do is write a text parser, but like we're not going to talk about that. So we're going to use evaluate. It's like using a sledgehammer on a nail because it evaluates anything, but it's at least going to evaluate these pieces of arithmetic. Okay, so what I actually want equal to do is I wanted to update the display with the evaluation of what's currently in there. Okay, so let's do that first. So the first thing that we get is X, and that's going to be the evaluation of what's in self in the display, right? So self.display is going to return like some sort of argument or some expression for being evaluated. We should do some try catching here, but that's going to be in like the full-fledged one. Let's just try to get minimum functionality for the time being. So X should be a number at this point, in which case I can take self.display and override it with whatever string X is. But then I also need to update, I need to tell the label itself to update. So what did we call the label? Oh, it was just self.label. Self.label should be updated to show now what's in self. The text, it should be self.display. Okay, so this needs to be given foo. So when I hit equal, it's going to do that instead. Okay, let's see if this will work. And if this will work, I can let you go. Whoops. But I encourage you, like go, I'll upload the listing. Oh, that's the wrong calculator app, obviously. Okay, so let's just see if I can add 3 and 3 plus 2. Yes. Okay, so obviously from here, it's just window dressing, right? I got to add the rest of the arithmetic buttons. I should add some try catching. I got to get all of these buttons placed properly, but like, I think at this point, like, I hope you would be confident that we could finish this if we had like another hour or so. There's like nothing too complicated. Just let me show you. So the one that I'm going to give you access to is like a lot more sophisticated. You should also think of how to like utilize the MVC, like the model view controller, right, to do a calculator. But here's the calculator that I'm going to give you access to, and it's a lot sexier, right? Equal, like we have clears, like this one actually accounts for decimals, right? So please, after that, like go study this calculator app, and otherwise I'll see you next week for file menus and dialog boxes. Have a good week. Okay, bye chat. Yeah. Hope you guys have a nice day. Thanks for showing up every week. I'll talk to you guys later.